Hello, Beam's had another update, and as is tradition, and because I really like views, I've made a video on it. This is the biggest update Beam's had since I started doing these, so I'll be leaving out all but the most interesting stuff, starting with this huge new map. Johnson Valley is Beam's off-roadiest map to date. It has a few paved roads, including a really long highway for speed testing, but mostly what roads there are bumpy dirt ones. There's also an off-road racetrack and some rock crawling paths, both of which you'll see again shortly. The new map is nice enough, but the best part of the update to me is that they've added not one but 5 new cars. We start with the Stambecco, a slightly goofy-looking but charming off-road van. It's the first Beam car to get something called dynamic tire pressure control, which lets you adjust your tire pressure on the fly. I, however, forgot to record a demo of that, so let's just start driving. The Stambecco is the least off-roady vehicle in this update, and certainly the most normal, but it's definitely no slouch. One could argue it's the most versatile vehicle in 0.27. It's not perfect at any one thing, but it's still pretty decently balanced as far as off-roaders go. The stock version favors solid tarmac a little bit more, but if you want to tip the scales a bit in favor of rallying, it's got a spec for that. The rally version is very well equipped for more difficult terrain. It's got 6 wheels, locking differentials, a 6x6 drivetrain, a low-range gearbox, and most importantly, a fancy livery. Combined with its sturdy-looking external roll cage, spare tires, and more lights than you can count on both hands, it's definitely the Stambecco's best off-roading configuration. It's pretty easy to drive, which definitely isn't the case for some of the cars in the update, and easy driving is boring, so it's a bit of a relief when the bumps start to really throw the truck around. I'm sure you could tune the truck to prevent this, but why would you want to? I mean, unless you don't like bumps breaking your windshield. We're going to move on from the Stambecco now, though, because there's plenty more to talk about. The Rock Basher is a bit more out there. It comes in 3 variants, and because that's not very many, I'm going to do something a bit unusual for me and briefly feature all of them. We start with the Rock Racer, which the devs describe as the jack-of-all-trades of off-road racing. It's the only one of the 3 cars with independent suspension, which of course gives it very different handling. It's my favorite to drive at high speed, either because of the independent suspension, or because the other 2 are, well, we'll get there. In fact, either this or the car I drove in the intro, and nearly used for the thumbnail, is my favorite in the update, though the intro car is a slightly customized version of a car I'll show you later. The rock crawler is... well, it's a rock crawler, no surprise there. I'm not really good enough at rock crawling to tell you much about it, other than that I know on a surface level that it's probably better than the rock crawling hopper we've had for a while. It's literally the rock crawler for one thing, that's its name, but it's also got a much lower center of gravity and it's mid-engined for a better weight balance. Also, despite being meant for slow driving, like the other Rock Basher configurations, it's got tons of power available if it needs to use it. I'd also like to mention that I really like the design of the rock crawling trails in Johnson Valley. The ones in Utah feel a bit prepared, but here it looks like somebody just found a bunch of rocks and spray-painted arrows on them. Both approaches are fine, but I like this one better. Rock crawling takes a while, so we're skipping ahead until the inevitable happens. Trying to move the crawler eventually just makes it fall down more, and although it does land on its wheels again at the end, I think it's time to move on. The final Rock Basher variant is the Rock Bouncer. There are mechanical differences between rock crawlers and rock bouncers, but I think the main difference is the driver. Someone who drives a rock crawler is patient, wise, and reasonable. Someone who drives a rock bouncer is more like me. They cross their fingers and floor it, with often disastrous but always spectacular results. There are lots of videos of this sort of thing on YouTube if you're interested. It is perhaps telling that most of them seem to end with a car on its roof. Johnson Valley is a nice map, but there's not much to do there, so I'm going to give you a break from the desert to have a look at a new feature. This update has, along with its 1 map and 5 cars, added regenerative braking for electric vehicles. You can choose the strength of this in the pie menu. With regenerative braking entirely off, the car coasts. A lot. If you have it all the way on the other hand, you get 1-pedal drive. If you let off the accelerator, the car brakes for you. That's not actually exactly true, though. Unfortunately, the car doesn't really slow down that quickly, as it's basically doing the electric equivalent of engine braking until you get below 10 miles an hour or so. Maybe it's because it's hard to balance the throttle with a controller, but I feel like this is nearly useless, at least in a video game. It slows down so slowly that you have to use the brakes anyway, and if you want to stop at a specific point, good luck, I guess. I really wanted to try driving around a racetrack or something without the brake pedal, but this just isn't nearly enough deceleration for that. That said, it does, I guess, make it slightly easier to drive in traffic, so let's try that out. Apparently, the traffic has other ideas. Oh well, let's leave Italy behind and try out this update's weirdest vehicle. The Wydra is absolutely bizarre for a number of reasons, but my favorite by far is that it is the first beam vehicle with skid steering, which means that it does awesome donuts. It's a little ATV thing with no speed and even less handling, and it really does seem more suitable for a mod than official content. But here it is, in all its ridiculous glory. I can't exactly make my mind up on whether I like it or not. It's really unique, it introduces a couple mechanics to Beam that weren't there before, and it has this really awesome RC car feel, but can you see yourself using it all that often? Me neither. Also, it's really slow, so it gets a bit boring to drive after a while. There's one big thing I haven't mentioned about it yet, though, and it's why I said the Stambecco is the least off-roady thing in the update rather than the Wydra. The Wydra is amphibious. To demonstrate this, here's the very Sherp-like 4x4 version of the Wydra. This is a fairly deep bit of river, far too deep for a normal off-roader to cross. But not the Wydra. Unfortunately, driving on the water makes the already painfully slow Wydra slow down even further, resulting in the single most boring experience I've ever had filming Beam. Seriously, if you think watching this shot is boring, just imagine playing it without the fancy camera angle and with no sense of progress towards cutting to the next segment. Come on, just get off the screen. Just a little further. Can you believe the base spec is even slower than this on water? There we go. After that miserable experience, I needed something really fast to put me right again, so this is the Dunekicker. Fast, loud, wallowy rear-wheel drive. This is just what I needed, and everything the Wydra isn't. In fact, I didn't mention the Dunekicker when I talked about my favorite cars in the update earlier, but it's definitely one of them. It is perhaps the perfect match for my driving style. This is the fastest spec. If you want something slower for exploring rather than racing, there are slower ones that are still plenty of fun. But, I mean, come on. Can you really beat this? The Dunekicker has a really fun handling model. It's loose and sloppy, but somehow still perfectly controllable. This is because of its amazing, apparently indestructible suspension, which makes these jumps feel like nothing. There used to be a mod for a similar truck. I'm not sure if it's still around, I don't remember the name, so I can't check. And while it was good, the Dunekicker is excellent. I think the suspension's a big part of that. Apparently, the devs put quite a lot of work into this, using their new bypass shock absorber simulation system. I don't really understand how it works, so I can't explain it, but it's wonderful. While you can happily ignore any jump thanks to the ultra-soft suspension, it also makes every corner terrifying. The truck handles fine, but you can always tell you're right on the edge of rolling. With one particularly steep corner left, our time with the Dunekicker is over. Let's briefly switch maps again. The West Coast map has had another update, this time a little smaller than last time. They've changed a few parts of the map, but what I'm interested in is the quarry, which is entirely new. Having spent many regrettable hours playing Forza Horizon 4, I will forever associate quarries with off-road racing. Which gives me an idea. With some very minor modifications to the roamer, you know, like a full suspension rebuild, engine swap, and nitrous oxide, we're ready. Let's see how the quarry works as a racetrack. The gearing might need some work. The roamer's pretty fast though. It's actually a little too fast given the steep drop at the edge of the quarry roads. I'm glad I decided against adding a supercharger. It also seems to be a lot easier to slide it through corners than keep it steady, not to mention that it's more fun to do that anyway. As for the quarry, I actually really like it as a racetrack, though I do wish it was maybe a little bigger. It's understandable that it's small, it is after all just a minor feature of a map full of other stuff, but I still feel like this lap should be 30 or 40 seconds longer. A badly timed first-person lag spike makes me lose control, but hey, the segment's time is up anyway. This is the Piccolina. It is not new. This, however, is. Apparently someone at Beam decided the off-roadiest Piccolina spec just wasn't off-roady enough, and so now we have the Class 5 Autobuggy. It still has the Piccolina's body and engine, but that's just about it. It's had a full Baja makeover, complete with shock absorbers so big they're taller than the hood. Like the Rock Basher and the Dunekicker, it's got excellent suspension, and you might recognize its tires. I used them on the roamer you just saw me fall off a cliff in. There is, however, one more thing to cover in this video. This is the Baja Extreme spec of the Piccolina, and it is absolutely terrifying to drive. To give you a better sense of this, let's switch to, sure, Utah, that works. Now the body's replaced by lightweight modern paneling, and the original Piccolina engine is no more. If this still shares any parts with its road-going counterpart, I certainly can't see them. I'm not sure if this is the fastest car in the update, that might still be the Rock Racer or the Dunekicker, but it is most definitely the hardest to drive. It's got an earth-shattering amount of power delivered to the rear wheels, and in such a small and lightweight car that means tons of wheel spin. It's so hard to keep the car in a straight line that if you look closely at the raw footage shots, you'll notice the replay is going to 2 different files at different points in the video. I had to record this segment in multiple takes. Interestingly though, I usually try and record these videos with as little experience with the update as I can, partly so I can record myself genuinely trying out the new stuff, mostly so I can get done faster. But I did test drive this car in Johnson Valley. Somehow there it was not exactly easy to drive, but much nicer. That probably had something to do with speed. Johnson Valley is much harder and therefore slower terrain than this little rally stage in Utah. On the other hand, I do vaguely remember going over 100 miles an hour there, so maybe this car is just better on sand. If you're not insane, there's also a slower spec of this, in between it and the more normal Baja Buggy. Though I modified it visually a bit, that's the car I used for the intro. It's way easier to drive on account of not having 820 horsepower. I actually briefly reopened Beam while writing the script to fact-check the extreme version's horsepower. It's actually 821 if you want to be pedantic. So I can tell you the more normal version makes a nice reserve 255. Still infinitely more than the 90-something that first buggy has, but no problem to drive. Thankfully, we're pretty much done with the Autobuggy, so I don't need to spend another 2 minutes talking about how hard it is to drive. Well, that's everything interesting in the update. I don't really have anything else to show you, so thanks for watching and goodbye. Actually, hang on. I decided after editing that last bit that this is an absolutely terrible ending, so instead I'd like to talk about the update as a whole. This is, by the way, very much not an official spec of the Autobuggy. That will be very obvious when I get to a corner. Now, I'd like to preface the rest of this conclusion by saying that I really like 0.27. I like everything that was added, even the torturously slow Wydra, and I wouldn't want any of it changed. That said, I kind of hope the next update focuses more on normal cars again. Recent updates, other than the ones that just remaster older cars, have added... well, you can't exactly call the Widgeon normal, and the Scintilla is a very high-end supercar, but, you know, varied, more or less broadly usable road-legal cars. This update, though, has one single normal-ish car, the Stambecco. Everything else is either the Wydra or a purpose-built off-road racer. This is all well and good, and far be it from me to criticize overemphasis of unusual cars. Roughly half my recent automation builds have been cars without any front bodywork, after all. But it's a little odd that we don't have a generic SUV, but we do have 2 different off-road buggies in the same update. This is not counting the Tograch, of course, because that's more of a crossover. Also, all these racing cars are very limited in terms of customization. I guess that makes sense, but as you might be able to tell from the atrocities I committed on the Roamer earlier in the video, or even the nearly undrivable road racing Autobuggy I built for this background footage, I really enjoy messing around with Beam's cars. When a game has as relatively few cars as Beam does, at least without mods, I like to be able to treat those cars essentially as their own sandboxes, turning them into whatever it is I feel like. With most of the cars in this update, you really can't do that. I spent around an hour getting this thing to handle like anything other than a heavy-duty off-road buggy. And though I'm pretty bad at tuning, you'd think my end result would be better than this. All that is to say, while I really enjoyed this kind of more extreme stuff, I do feel like there are too many holes in Beam's current car list to focus on niche things just yet. I, of course, am not a game developer, and I realize it's hard to make new cars, especially ones with tons of configurations and customization options like I want, but then again, this update does have 5 cars in it, and they've apparently been working on it for over 2 years, so as much as I love the update, I'm not sure we needed such a heavy off-road focus. On the other hand, who am I kidding? This update is awesome, and don't take what I just said as being negative about the update overall. I'm actually really happy about it. Now we really are done though, so as I was saying earlier, Thanks for watching, and goodbye.